Father, I don't know if you can hear us. We not.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. At the risk of making this about you, I think it's important to have a little bit of context here that you've worked at the Vatican before, and you were there when Pope St. John Paul II passed away, and you were part of those proceedings. You can speak Italian, you can speak Latin, and now you're in a church in Soweto, you can speak Sesotho as well. Just in terms of your personal faith, can we start there, Father?
Well, I was a student. I was sent by the Archdiocese of Johannesburg with another. As when young men applied to the priesthood, I wasn't actually that young, to be honest, when I applied after I'd been a lecturer. And most seminarians, as we call them, who are studying for the priesthood, are sent to the National Seminary in Pretoria, St. John Vianney. And sometimes here and there, a few are sent further afield to Kenya, to Britain, maybe to, in this case, to Rome, to Ireland. And I was at the end of my second year when Pope John Paul was coming to the end of his life. I knew that he was dying. It was very edifying and very beautiful, and sad and beautiful at the same time. And he died, as you've already said, on the 2nd of April, 2005, in the week just after Easter. And so, yes, I was there on the square, on St. Peter's Square. There were, I'm sure, a few other South Africans, I'm not sure, around, but many were out of Rome because it was holidays from the university and the colleges. But many of us were there, including some others from South Africa, when the new Pope was elected, which was some days later, who was Pope Benedict. But yes, we were there at the end of the pontificate of Pope John.
So a lot has been said about the significance of Pope Francis presiding over the funeral service of another pontiff, which hasn't happened in many centuries. Tell us about the significance.
Yes, I think it took most people, maybe everybody, by surprise in 2013 when Pope Benedict spoke to a small group of collaborators, co-workers and journalists and said, I don't have strength to continue, and so I'm going to resign. And that was effective from just some days later, from Ash Wednesday in 2013. He was the first Pope to do so in 600 years. It's not really foreseen. Normally, a Pope is a Pope for life. You know, he's chosen by the cardinals and then he serves until the end of his earthly life. But he, I think, had worked so closely with his predecessor, Pope John Paul II, and seen how difficult it was to buy, a human community of over 1 billion souls, Catholics. And I think he felt that it really needed someone who would have all his forces and his strength. And he knew that he was growing weaker. You know, he was in his later years, and that was 10 years ago. He was 85 and 84, and he knew that he needed to make room for someone else. So it's not really foreseen, or at least not expected. It is possible. Sometimes popes have resigned out of pressure or fear, or they really didn't want to be pope, and it was the political forces were so difficult they stepped back. But it wasn't the case for Pope Benedict. It was a free act, as he made it quite clear. He wanted to let the cardinals, with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, choose another man to lead the church.
Father Donnelly, they say for those reasons you've mentioned that it's a very lonely job. And Pope Francis says having his predecessor close to him made it feel like he had a brother. Did this permeate in the church in some way, a sense of community and family?
I think that the job of a pope is both full of joy and full of sorrow, as all leadership is. And yes, it can be very lonely, but there's also a constant flow of people around him, not just working there, but coming to visit, of all religions, of all persuasions. And so there's a lot of movement, a lot of community. But I think we know what he was referring to, which is, someone with he can really share some of the challenges, the stresses, the difficulties, the problems of the job with as a pastor to the universal church. And I think Pope Francis has said that he really relied, he would go before he traveled on his overseas trips to visit to make pilgrimages to different parts of the world, he would go to speak with Emeritus Pope, as we call it, Pope Benedict. And so that was an unusual situation, but I think a real grace for him. On the other hand, as you know, Pope Francis is a people's person, and he's always with people, but I think he really appreciated that kind of senior, quiet guidance. We don't know the conversations they had. We weren't privy to them.
So the Vatican spokesperson, Matteo Bruni, said the event was going to be an austere one. He says roughly follows that reserved for a supreme pontiff, but with some changes. And one of those changes that have really upset some world leaders was to only recognize Germany and Italy as the official attendees at the funeral service. Other heads of state will be attending, but the Vatican was saying they will only be recognized in their person. Why do you think the Vatican took this decision?
I can't speak for them, I'm afraid. All I do know is, having worked there for the 7 years that was subsequent to being a student, and having lived there, it is one of the quietest, most effective diplomatic setups in the world. It's extraordinarily effective. So there is full representation of nearly 200 countries in the world, full diplomatic representation to the Holy See, or to the Vatican, as we often say, but to the Holy See. A very small, unusual-sized country, not to a religion, but to a state. So the Pope, as you know, he is pastor of the entire religion. He's chief shepherd of the flock, but he's also the sovereign head of state. I think Pope Benedict made it clear, and this has been said, that he really doesn't want the limelight. He would like a simple, quiet funeral. Now, it's all very well to say that, but he was the Supreme Pontiff, as we call him, for nearly 80 years, and so he deserved the funeral of a Pope. It is true that with massive international diplomatic events where many countries are represented, it takes a lot of energy, an enormous amount of energy and time to manage 180 delegations or so. The Holy See has representations in all those countries, so the Pope sends out his ambassadors to the world, and we have Archbishop Peter Wells, the Pope's nuncio, as he's called, the messenger of the Pope, who is representing the Pope, Pope Francis, to South Africa, but also to 4 other countries. But then to have our country send our ambassadors there, it is just an enormous amount of work. And don't forget, he died on the 31st of December. This is one of the quietest periods of the year. The whole church and the whole world is preparing for the new year. We are in those beautiful days after Christmas. So sometimes running on lower staff, and it's in the middle of winter and a papal funeral. So I don't know, but it's not that others are not welcome. I mean, everybody is welcome. They've made that extremely clear. But I suppose in terms of countries who they've given a certain precedence to in this particular case, because he is German by birth, and because the Vatican City-State is embedded within Italy, the largest set of communications happen with Italy, that those are the 2 obvious choices. I suppose, Everybody is welcome, that's for sure. All the ambassadors of those countries to the Holy See, to the Vatican, to Pope Francis, 1/3, I think, reside in Rome, and others will come in from outside. I'm sure very many people will be there, So countries will be represented without a doubt. But I think the focus is simply on Christian rite of burial, rite, R-I-T-E. So the procedure, the liturgy of praying for the deceased Pope and laying him to rest, And perhaps just the focus is on that.
And Father, just help us go through the process of what will happen today, and just maybe just harken back just a little bit to the funeral service of Pope St. John Paul II, what you experienced then, and just juxtapose it to what we can expect today.
So he died on a Saturday evening, just after Easter in 2005, Pope John Paul. The square was completely full. There must have been close to 500,000 people there when they are standing only, and that's a large body of humanity in absolute silence, as we had been praying for him in those days preceding. And then one of the archbishops quietly said to us that the Pope has just died. So there was a great pause. It was very quiet and very beautiful, and sad, but also beautiful, And we knew that many people, not only Catholics, many people around the world had been closely following this. That was in 2005. and it's like a family losing its father, because the Pope, then there is no Pope. He has died. At the same time, the Church then has no one, if you like, who is leading her, who is the successor to the Apostle Peter. That's who the Pope is. Pope just means father, and he is the father of the Church, and he is following on from St. Peter. So it gives one great pause, and people all wonder, who can take up this role. Pope John Paul had been leading the Catholic Church for 27 years through some tremendously difficult times, the end of the Cold War, and really great tumult and turmoil in the world. That's why his opening words in 1978, when he appeared on the balcony of the new Pope, had been to say, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Throw open the doors to Christ." Those were his opening words, That it was to kind of assure all of us, in a way, the words that are given to us in the Bible many times over, not to be afraid. So now this was a question. You see, he had died, and who could possibly follow him? This has happened before in history.
Of course, it's a conversation.
Pope Benedict XVI was the 265th Pope, so there have been many, but obviously with social media and the attention of the media, now we know a lot more about what is happening. So very simply, at that point, when the Pope has died, then there's a period of mourning, and then very quickly all the cardinals from around the world gather in Rome to elect the new Pope. In this case, the cardinals will come because they are the Pope's closest co-workers, but they don't need to elect a new Pope because we have a Pope, Pope Francis. So this is what is so unusual this time around. But it was very beautiful in 2005 to hear Cardinal Ratzinger, as he was, Joseph Ratzinger, speaking with such love of Pope John Paul, with whom he had worked so closely, and then waiting for the cardinals to elect whomever they wished. And we feel that the Holy Spirit, they ask the Holy Spirit to help them select, as they say, the Church's worthiest son to take up this mantle, So that was back then. So this time, there is no electing a new Pope, but there is, of course, the burial of the Pope. So I think also one doesn't want to, in a sense, interrupt the ongoing work of Pope Francis, because he is our Pope and is guiding the Church. We know who the Holy Father is, but he also wants to bury his predecessor with dignity. And so what you asked me what will happen, they brought in procession very early on Monday morning his body down from the small, they say monasteries, a small house where he had been living with a few others who'd taken care of him, his closest associates, for these past 10 years. They walked him down in the dark, it's winter, and brought his body to the Basilica, as St. Peter's is known, and it was placed there, and as you know, there we are, he's lying in state, and for the next 3 days, then the faithful would come and bid him farewell. There were 65,000 people who came on Monday. I don't know how many came on Tuesday and Wednesday. Pope John Paul was something similar. The numbers were much larger, as had been expected. 4 million people came to Rome at the time of his funeral, and he was viewed by probably 1 million people. This is, though, 17 years ago. So it's slightly different, but nevertheless, it's a key moment. It's not, you said somber or austere. I think he wanted it just to be quietly laying him to rest, not too much attracting attention to this moment, because he knows that the work of the Church goes on. There are lots of life must go on.